Board of Trustees meeting to order. Recognizing that today is September 11th, would like to go off script and ask you all to please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you for that. Melinda, would you like to do the roll call?
Sure. Stephen McFadden.
Here.
Anna Franz. Here. Thomas Strudwick.
Here.
Juanita Richards. Here. Don Lang.
Here. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming. I appreciate you all being here. The first order of business today is the ratification of the negotiated agreement. I'd like to ask Kim Garza, Vice President of Human Resources, to give you a recap on that agreement and talk about High Point.
Okay. So in your packet, you have a summary which kind of just gives you an overview of the language changes. We're still working on the red line piece with the Faculty Association, going back and forth between notes because our, I would say for Mike and myself, our memories are not quite what they used to be. So we have a couple spots where you have to go back and look at some notes. But overall, it was a very positive negotiation process. We opened on June 7th and we ended on August 23rd. So I think we found, as always with our faculty, that we share many common interests, which is great. We don't always agree on the right solution or the best solution, but in the end, we came together to craft a package that really provides what both parties need. And so a couple of the highlights that I just want to mention is we did add language for the evaluation and observation of associate faculty. We have not had that before, and so that really provides structure for the deans, as well as clear expectations for our part-time faculty as to how they're going to be assessed in their teaching responsibilities. We added some professional support language for tenured faculty who may, because once you're tenured, you're kind of out of that mentoring process, that probationary process. So as things come up, we've made or created a process that allows for more peer support should that faculty member need that to resolve maybe classroom management issues or governance concerns or things like that. So we think that that's a real positive. And we spent quite a bit of time cleaning up our mentor language. We added language for a mentorship program 3 years ago. And at that time, it looked awesome. 3 years later, we determined that it was pretty cumbersome and we were never able to really get the program off the ground. And so we've streamlined that quite a bit, and we'll see the first kind of fruits of that this fall with our new faculty. And then we were also able to provide some clarity around the curriculum development process and set aside some dollars for that development. I think the biggest thing for us would be we made a significant jump in wages in our base salary for our full-time faculty. So we looked at a couple places. The state board does an annual review of kind of full-time faculty salaries. So they look at base, they look at entry-level wages, and kind of play that out. So for a number of years, Big Bend has been in the 4th quartile, which is not the best quartile. And when we benchmarked against, we selected 7 other colleges. So CBC, Grays Harbor, Peninsula, Walla Walla, Yakima, Wenatchee, and Cascadia. And we were 3rd from the bottom. So right in the mix with Peninsula and Grays Harbor. And it's been really important for us to come up with a plan to retain the existing faculty that we have and be able to recruit new faculty. So we've lost some faculty to other institutions, and we've had some potential candidates turn us down because our wages were not high enough. And so I've been here for 7 years, and this is the first time that salary discussions with potential faculty members have been challenging. So really trying to play up other aspects of the college as opposed to the salary that we can offer. And so it was really important that we make a change. When we looked at the 7 colleges, the median base prior to whatever they're going to all negotiate during this summer was $53,673 with the average salary, and that's just the base, of $53,819. And so our base has been $48,224. So there's a big gap. And so I really worked some magic on my friend Linda Schoonmaker. And Bryce could attest that he said that was pretty interesting to watch. So I'm sure it was like one of those wildlife shows where the animals are kind of going at it, but we made a significant jump to move our base to 55,000. And so all of our full-time faculty will reap the benefit of that. That puts us right in the mix. Walla Walla settled right before we did, and they're a little over 55. So we are right kind of in with CBC, Walla Walla. Wenatchee is still negotiating, and Yakima has a significantly higher base. They're in the low 60s, and that could change as well. But so that increase in the base is a 14.05% increase. So that's huge. But that is offset by the 3.2% monies that we received from the legislature for the general wage increase, as well as turnover savings. So as part of this agreement, faculty have waived the distribution of turnover savings for the duration of this agreement. In the past, the turnover savings have been negotiated and redistributed to existing faculty members as an increase or an increment. And so they have waived that for the next 2 years to help cover the cost. Juanita, you look like you have a question.
Yeah, turnover savings. Give me some more.
So turnover savings is the difference between the cost of the salary and benefits of the departing faculty member and the incoming faculty member.
Okay.
And so previously, and my buddy John Bosenberg could probably give you a better response, but previously the legislature allowed for those funds to be redistributed to existing faculty. And that's what our agreement said. And so we've always done that. We've distributed it equally, and that's how our faculty salaries moved up within our salary index matrix. So, so I think the faculty were pleased with the new base, and we also agreed to add 2 promotional steps, 2 additional promotional steps to our structure for full-time faculty. We were not able to adjust the part-time faculty rates. We had done that a couple of years ago, and when we benchmarked those, we're still right in the middle of the median for part-time faculty, at least at this moment in time. But we did also agree to develop another promotional step for our part-time faculty. So we, faculty did ratify the agreement on September 6th, so that was Friday. We have started to prepare contracts for our faculty, and if you all approve the agreement today, then we will distribute those contracts. So that would be an awesome thing if you would do that for me.
So hence the reason we added the negotiated agreement to today's meeting agenda as an action item. But before we move forward with that, Salah, I thought I would ask if you had something you would like to add.
Actually, Kim here covered it quite well. The faculty were very pleased, especially with the salary increase, 14% with a lot of smiles on my faces. I would say that they, yeah, I'm trying to think of anything, but Kim covered it so well, it's hard to really think of anything. Their chief concern was, of course, salary, and there were a few concerns about the calendar, but we also talked about that and got that sorted out as well. So, because we did have a bit of flux over the calendar and some logistical issues. It wasn't really anything that was a huge deal. It was just some things we had to get some consensus on, but that got wrapped up. And from the meeting that we had as a faculty last Friday, the general consensus I got was that everybody was quite happy with what we came up with.
Excellent. Thank you for that. So based on that, we would need a motion to approve the negotiated agreement with the Faculty Association.
I would make a motion that we approve the agreement with the Faculty Association.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Is there any additional discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Before we move on to the next item, I was remiss at the start, and I want to back up. This meeting is being recorded on Zoom. There is a change in the technology in this room, and that change is that previous media site would stream these meetings live. The technology was aged and hard to maintain, and when we converted to Zoom, the meeting is being recorded, but it will not be posted for viewing somewhere in about a 24-hour window. In a perfect scenario, it'll be available for viewing off the website sooner, but 24 hours is our target goal to make sure that it's loaded up. And that will be also true for all regular Board of Trustees meetings. Do you have any questions?
So they can't see us live right now if they're not in this room.
Correct, but they will get to see us tomorrow in full. Okay. The next item of business is a list of tasks with regards to the upcoming presidential search. And the first one, Terry is stepping out. He was here for the negotiated agreement discussion. We previously had a conversation, and we're in agreement that Terry will not be typically present during the presidential search special meetings and that particular process, and will remain focused on his school year and his remaining time here until the end of June, meeting all the rest of the initiatives of the college. Thank you, Terry. So the first item that we have up for conversation is the confirmation of who from the Board of Trustees is going to lead this process. What I wanted to make sure that I reminded all of you of is that this is going to be very time consuming. In 2012, it involved numerous special meetings for the board, study sessions for the board, and a commitment of time for the two trustees that led and oversaw the Professional Search Advisory Committee. We will ask you later in this discussion today if you're ready to make the decision that we will conduct an internal or an external search. If you're not ready to make that decision today, we're fully prepared to bring that topic back up in our next meeting, but we will need at that point, no later, to make a decision which way we're going to go. With regard to the presidential search chair, if you refer to Board Policy 1000, the chairperson is the only member authorized to speak for the board, other than in rare and specifically authorized instances. From that, whomever is the chair of the presidential search process, we want to make sure that we're all aware and reminded that the Board of Trustees' pursuit of information flows to the chair and on to the administration to prevent interruptions to campus workflow and policy governance. As such, along with the regular annual business of the Board of Trustees, it's my plan to chair the presidential search process as former chairman Mike Brand did in 2012. And I have taken the necessary steps in my personal and professional life to ensure that my schedule will permit me to do so. However, I would like to make sure that that is something that all of you appreciate.
I'll talk. I did talk to Stephen earlier, and I'm also interested in chairing this process. I was involved in the previous process, although Mike Wren and Mike Blakely were primarily the two contact persons, although we were involved quite a bit. I know Stephen would do a good job, and I'm not here to say he wouldn't. I know it will be very time consuming. I've been involved in the local, state, and even the national level, and certainly understand what presidents do. I have talked with presidents and trustees in my role at the state level, and I think I have a pretty good understanding of what the marketplace is out there, if you will. I do have the time, I do have connections to the community. Stephen certainly has a stronger connection with the workforce education, although I was involved at the city council level and also at the EDC level, and I feel that I'm well prepared to understand the bigger picture. I guess it comes down to this is the most important decision, of course, that we will make. It's up to the board of trustees to decide who they want to lead that search.
So based on an internal versus an external search, I mean, regardless of whether we go internal or external, we as a board need to have someone that's appointed to be the point person for this process.
So
Is that correct?
the workload of the board does not change even if you have a consultant present. Really, the only thing that will change is the cost for us in the long run. The majority of the steps that are going to occur throughout this process have to have direct engagement from the board. And if we follow the typical process, there'll still be a presidential search advisory committee reviewing candidates, shortlisting those candidates, leading to reference checking, then bringing forward a short list, top 5, to the board of trustees for full review, face-to-face interviews, and then travel for site visits to wherever that candidate is currently employed. And we will talk a little bit about the overall process, and we do have a draft calendar that is dramatically based off of the process that we did in 2012 with some additional steps based on how things have changed here on the campus in recent years and things that we want to make sure that we address and tackle in the search program.
So it's the concept that even if we have a consultant, we would have that committee structure then too.
I know, I hate to put John on the spot, but I know he's going to make a presentation later on, but is it typically the board chair who heads up that presidential search? Is there any?
In my experience, it has been the board chair, but I can't characterize this typical. I mean, each board has its own culture, its own history. It's really up to the board, those board of trustees, to determine who's got the time and their availability.
Thank you.
So I've moved to appoint Stephen McFadden as the chair of the committee and to appoint John Lane as a member of that committee.
I'll second that.
We have a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion?
So what is the difference between the two roles?
So as chair of the board of trustees, I'll also be responsible for chairing and convening and overseeing the operation of the Presidential Search Advisory Committee. In 2012, it was board chair Wren, supported by Vice Chair Blake. And you'll see as we get further through the agenda what our actual Professional Search Advisory Committee looked like in 2012 and the modifications that we've made to that and are recommending for 2019, 2020.
And with a full-time job, you're able to set aside that time?
I'm actually officially on record with my commissioners and approved to do whatever is necessary to fulfill my role.
And I think it's a consistent leadership message that we have the board chair and the committee chair be that unified individual so that there's not split messaging. I think it's better to prevent any disputes.
And currently, based on your board policy, any public statements coming from the board in presidential search come from the board chair. So you create an interesting bridge if there's 2 chairs, because there's still only one by our existing board policy that's supposed to be on the upper board.
Thomas, would you be interested in assuming that assistant role? I know you right now have just completed a master's degree in organizational management. You're doing a lot of leadership things. Is that something you'd like to do?
I think for me, I can't answer that, just not knowing what the time commitment is and what's involved with that. Obviously, I want to support this process in a way that's advantageous, but also want to be realistic about other time commitments. So I'm open to the idea and not opposed to it. It would need to know more about what would be involved with that.
You're suggesting John Thomas rather than yourself.
I'm just asking.
We have a motion and a second on the floor. Is there any additional discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
Motion carries. Thank you.
Can I clarify who seconded that motion?
So the next item is the presidential search process, and I'm very pleased to have a special guest with us today, and that's John Bosenberg. He is the Deputy Executive Director for Business Operations at the State Board. He has worked in the community and technical college system for about 30 years. During the past 21 years, he has been at the State Board working with a team to support and represent the colleges on accounting, operating and capital budget, and human resource issues. From 1989 through 1997, he worked as the Human Resource Director at Pierce College. John graduated from Peninsula College in 1980 and Western Washington University in 1982. And he has a great presentation for us today around the presidential search process and the perspective of what's been occurring in the Washington state system. John, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. It's great to be here. I'm going to move over to the podium. Hopefully I'll not trip. I'll invite you to interrupt with questions as I go through this. Pretty informal. So just let me know, raise your eyebrows, or give me some signal that you have a question or a concern as I go through this. We'll go ahead and start. Okay. My gray hair shows I've been around for a while. You just heard I've been around for a little over, in the system for a little over 30 years. Prior to that, I was in state government for a few years. Started off just after graduating from college, I used to set chokers as a walker. And it was restaurant business. You remember Sea Galley? Crab legs, we got crab legs. Yeah, that was, I didn't do the dance, but I used to dance restaurants as well. So I've been around for a long time and have done a couple of these searches, either as a support person to a consultant, done that twice, as well as oversaw 2 searches for the executive director, and have facilitated trustee thinking around colleges or the local administration around college searches. So I've got some experience, but again, some of it I've far. So if you have questions, feel free to poke me a little bit. Again, if you disagree, what I'll be sharing with you is fairly typical information on a typical search. And what I hope to have come out of this is through a sharing of information and a shared conversation, that a shared understanding will come out of this in terms of process steps that are important for you to have here at the college, in your culture, your history, your practices, and the involvement of your internal and external community in that process. So we'll go through roles of consultant if you choose to go that route, trustee roles, typical roles, as well as the search community typical roles, how you communicate and the involvement of your larger community, again, both internal to the college and external to your larger community. We'll go through some details. I'll probably skip a lot of the exact timelines, because the last few slides are giving you a little level of detail that you might want to consider as you make this process your own. I've had a couple of cups of coffee, so coffee too.
Cheers to that.
You're not alone.
Okay. So I think it's real important for you to understand, and folks involved in the search, to understand what's going on at your college. What's the current climate? What are the issues playing out? What are the challenges and opportunities you face here within the college and external to the community? Doing that assessment right up front will help you decide what you're looking for in candidates, and also whether or not a consultant is important. Also understanding the system, what's going on within the system, how communication decisions are made within the system and within the state. I think it's also important because your president will represent you in the system discussions and decision making, as well as within the legislature and the governor's office and other decision making bodies that affect you, again, both statewide and regional community. So having that understanding is important, and may lead you to whether or not you need a consultant to facilitate that. So I think in terms of the current practices, it's almost 50-50 with colleges who engage a consultant and colleges that don't, that do the recruitment, use internal staff to manage that and coordinate that recruitment. Why use a consultant? Well, they have experience, they have a network nationally, they can bring candidates to your doorstep, provide some distance, some objectivity between the trustees and the administration and the larger community. They have a process that has worked with other institutions that they've gone through, and if they're a good consultant, they'll adopt that process to your needs. And again, bring candidates for your consideration. There are lots of different consulting firms that are active in our state. BBCC has one, Gold Hill has one, or has been active, and there's a number of others that have been a little less active here and there. How much consulting will cost will depend upon your location, travel costs, as well as what you engage that consultant to do. Some colleges engage them just to do reference checks, and so they manage the rest of that process internally. Some of them engage the consultant to run the whole search, so they come in, engage with the local community to find a position profile and a process, and then help recruit, and then help screen, and then manage those candidates as they move through the process and help coordinate the internal steps.
So Stephen, you had mentioned there really is, in terms of time commitment, no difference between an internal and an external, going internal or external, but I see that as, wouldn't that be a fundamental difference in terms of time commitment related to
So with regard to reference
screening,
checks,
initial screening, background checks, all that kind of stuff?
I think that's a choice that you can make, but if you look at some of the searches that have been done in the community college system in Washington State, they've engaged the consultant and then still have the Presidential Search Advisory Committee review all the candidates and do the trimming, and then the consultant did the reference checking in some cases, but not in all. If we do this as an internal process, it would be Kim Garza in the chair of the process that would make calls. And in 2012, our process was that our VP of HR asked the questions and the board chair was in the room, and they both kept two separate sets of notes. They combined their notes, and then they made their shared notes for the search committee, and then advanced that information to them to select the top 5 to come to the board. And in fact, our movement in 2012 ended up being a group of 6, I believe, that were recommended for the board, and 1 withdrew themselves before the candidate roster got to the board of trustees. So we could trim this down to doing very little until the consultant has done his work. One of the other issues that we have as a school is the cost of that, because we do not eliminate the cost of administrative staff time and the rest of the board of trustees expenses that are going to occur in terms of the actual selection of candidates. So every dollar for the consultant is a tack on.
Thanks.
Preempted some of my pitter patter here, which is probably for the best. Going to what goes on in internally managed recruitment, you get greater control. It's your process. You own it. You set the pace. It's less expensive. There's still a cost because your folks are usually it's the HR and your public information folks who are coordinating or managing that, and they're not doing other things while they're doing that. And so it has to do with their capacity to take on these additional roles. And again, a much quicker start because you don't have to go through an RFP process to solicit bids from a consultant to review those bids and then make a choice. So a quicker start, less expensive, and greater control. Why not? Capacity issues. Typically, the local folks don't have that national network. They don't have connections with the associations. And so there are certainly mitigating steps to do that, to overcome that, and reach out and talk to those people still. But you don't have an ongoing relationship with some of those sources of candidates. And some colleges have newer HR folks or newer business officer folks who might need that kind of process. So that's also a consideration. That you don't have that in this case. You've got folks that have been around a little bit of time. 7 years, you said?
Feels like 40 years.
Dog years?
Yeah, dog years.
Yeah, I get that. So key questions to ask as you consider a consultant or no consultant is, what is your relationship with your internal and external communities? Is it important for you to have a consultant that has a process that provides you some distance? What's the availability and the capacity for the internal folks to manage and take on that additional work? And what would be the scope? You can, again, you could engage a consultant to do pieces, to do the outreach, to facilitate the reference checks, those kinds of pieces. So you can farm those pieces out. Questions? None? Search committee. Again, fairly typical process, but as you've already referenced, your past practice. So that's something to think about, as well as expectations for participation, both in your internal college community and your external community, and whose buy-in is important. A person or a group participates through their representative in this process. They're buying into the process and the outcome. So that's a consideration. Typically, again, 2 trustees to avoid a quorum, where you can meet and conduct the business of the screening committee without having a public meeting. And that goes to maintain the confidentiality of candidates as they are as they apply and move through the process up to the point in time it becomes a public process, typically at that interview stage. We narrow the candidates down to 5 or 6, 4, whatever the magic number might be for you. Internal communities, classified staff, faculty, exempt employees, students, diversity or equity inclusion office, external communities. How plugged are you with your community, and who's important to have at the table? Will be the foundation board, which is typically a business person in your community, or a CBO, community-based organization, nonprofit. Who's your partners in business and labor in the community? And it might be important to have at the table. For the expertise, the skills, the awareness of their community and its needs. Support person is usually there, even if you have a consultant. If you don't, the HR is typically leading that process. And the public information office is also involved in terms of developing advertising and managing communications, helping facilitate that important communication process. And again, the consultant did use. That's typically the people who are on the committee. Again, 2 reps from each of the internal and 1 rep from the external. In terms of how those folks are selected, typically people go to the groups representing those folks. It would be a faculty labor organization, the classified labor organization. You'd ask for 1 or 2 members, whatever in the size of the community you want, and you get names from that. You could select, but that tends to be viewed as biased and stacking the committee. So the typical process is that you go to each of those groups, ask for 1 or 2 reps, and again, oftentimes the trustees will identify which groups of the external community should be at that table to get that buy-in and expertise, and they would reach out to those individuals in terms of the larger external community. Size of the committee is important. Again, this is a typical process or a size in terms of how folks are represented. I think my note in there says there's 1 person who's in leadership, 1 who is at large. Again, that's typically if you go to the labor organization, that's when they're going to make that decision. And my recommendation would be they should make that decision. I think, what I'm trying to get across with this slide is 2 folks from internal and 1 from external. That's a committee of 15. That's pretty large. If you go 2 from each, it's up to 20, and then it becomes difficult to schedule meetings and to get through that work that you need to have happen on a timely basis to get somebody here. before your current incumbent, before Carrie leaves. And so that's a consideration, maybe not a driving consideration, but another consideration is that size of that committee. So again, reiterating, this is typically a participatory process, and buy-in is a consideration.
So John, I'm sorry to interrupt you. So going back to your last slide, what do you recommend then in terms of that committee size? If you feel like 15 is too large, where's that balance
I
based on what
think
you're
15
saying?
is a good representative number. I think you want to be represented. Again, there's nothing magic in it. It's kind of looking back to your history. In my experience is between having 12 and 15, but in my recent experience, it's been state board, and so we're looking statewide and wanting to have folks engaged and participatory, so they can participate in a couple of different processes if they're not sitting at that table. My hard role as executive director for group is getting people to participate, but not everybody sitting at the table. Because again, you can't have a couple hundred people sitting at the table. It just becomes unwieldy and unable to schedule. And you need to have consistent participation. Again, as we kind of talked about earlier, it is a time commitment for everybody, not just the board chair, but for everybody. And you need to be there from meeting to meeting because you're making decisions at each of those meetings. And you want that participation and that buy-in and those decision points.
We're a small rural community college, of course, and we have vast distances and diverse communities. How do you include that in looking at that list? It seems like it's a little more focused on the campus.
I think it is. I mean, the campus, and again, this is ultimately the trustees' process and the trustees' decision. But you want that expertise, that view, those diverse viewpoints from your internal and external community. If you have large extension sites, you might have changed that list to include someone from the external community. I'm not familiar whether you have extension sites here. I didn't think so, but like Wenatchee might bring somebody and to engage. And so you just kind of take a look at your external community and who's important to have at that table, what organizations and or individuals that are involved, that care about your college and your mission, and have the time and the expertise potentially to participate in these conversations. So, and there's nothing magic in this. It's fairly typical. You really need to look, to your community, both internal and external, to do something that works for you and your partners, your staff.
I wanted to just jump in if I could for a minute, John. So in 2012, there were 14 on the committee. The proposed roster for the process this time around is 15. And there's essentially one addition, and that is a representative from the committee on equity, inclusion, and diversity. But it's broken down in a very similar manner to this particular roster. And with regard to John's question about the size of our geographic area, for instance, the K-12 educator representative in 2012 was Assistant Superintendent of Othello School District, Mike Villarreal. And so there was some intentional maneuvers to make sure that our entire constituent base was represented in that presidential search process.
So one of the other points on this slide was, again, be mindful as you put this committee together of potential biases. You want folks who are again available, who come to this process with an open mind, have that understanding of, and one of the things you want to do initially is have that discussion about the mission of the college, the vision, what's going on, what are the challenges and opportunities as you bring a committee together to define what kind of candidate you're going to vote for, what skills and experiences you're going to be looking for in your future president. Again, trustee role on that committee, or as a board, excuse me. Again, look to your past practice, your internal expectations as a board, as board members, and the community, and your availability. We touched on that and understand that piece. This is, again, the trustees' process. This is, I've heard it said many times, the most important decision you make. This and granting tenure are the two big roles the trustees take on. In this process, as people want to participate, they care about the college. And so getting them involved throughout the process in terms of your communication is important. So that becomes a deal for the chair of the committee as well with support from staff. You make the ultimate decision. It's important that you can understand you own that, and that as you bring people together to participate in this process and inform that decision, they understand. Understand and respect the process. And you're bringing in people, you want their opinions, you want to hear their opinions, you want to adjust your position based on those opinions and those thoughts as you come together again as a board to make that final decision and that higher decision. Confidentiality is important. Again, some candidates are in trusted roles at other institutions or in other businesses, other organizations, and they're taking a risk in applying. So understanding the confidentiality of that, again, that initial application to the point as you open the process up and engage the public in a formal way with those 5 or 6 or 3 or 4 candidates that get invited into an interview. And also understand the parameters of the Open Meetings Act in terms of making decisions in an open meeting, having conversations, again, in your screening committee or as a board as you weigh the skills and abilities of these candidates. This can occur in confidential executive meetings. However, you do have to make decisions in a public meeting. You've got a legal advisor here that will help you throughout that process. But it is a balance as you move forward. The Open Meetings Act requires that decisions and near decisions be made in a public meeting, and that understanding what a near decision is maybe more of an art than the science. But again, we've got some help you throughout that process. Getting back to the search committee role and charge, again, these are difficult, but understanding that this is an open, inclusive national search, that's the direction you head in, that supports the college's goals, and provide opportunities for all candidates, system development of that profile, and position announcement can be my buy-in in terms of what you're looking for and skills and experiences from the candidates. That even though each representative represents a certain portion of your community, that when they're participating in the process, they have a broader vision. They represent the entire college, maybe with a point of view from faculty or classified or from the student body. But they need to come together to look at the entire mission and vision of the college and operate throughout the process with that in mind. Developing the job and competency-related interview questions. Again, the committee typically will conduct the first round of interviews, and then assist in that screening of applications. Again, that depends on the process and the consultant or not that you use. Remembering that information is held confidential until it's not, until it becomes public, and to work collaboratively. You're all partners in this process. They all want the same interest. Kim was talking, you have a shared interest in the outcome of this thing. You might come at it from different points of view that are coming together as a college and as a search community. With keep in mind.
With regard to the confidentiality piece, all of the board of trustees and every member of the Presidential Search Advisory Committee will be needing to sign a confidentiality agreement prior to the full commencement of the process, which would be what we've done in the past 2 previous times.
And that's fairly typical. I mean, I don't know what your statement says, but it generally just communicates in writing form kind of what I said, that this is confidential information. And you're dealing with someone else's career, and you will lose candidates potentially if they feel that this is not a confidential process. They won't apply, or they'll drop out very quickly. And candidates for these roles understand at some point if they make it to that interview stage, it has become public. Again, have a commitment to attend and participate in the meetings. Oftentimes there'll be regular updates to the board as the process proceeds. Typically occurs over the academic year. We'll get into the schedule and timeline a little bit. And we respect the role and contributions of everybody. You can disagree with the position or with the thinking or with the including or excluding the candidates throughout the process, but we'll collaboratively resolve those. And everyone can contribute. Everyone represents a different point of view that comes together to help you select the best candidate for you. I think as you bring together a committee and as a board, we've already had this conversation, as the board chair will communicate for you, usually with the help of your public information officer, your HR or consultant, to help draft some of those messages. I having overseen 2 searches myself, the first one I over-communicated. I would tell people, hey, nothing's going on, but you know, in 2 weeks' time we're going to do this, and the next week nothing's going on, but 1 week's time we're doing this, and so I tended to overcompensate in that. You need to communicate regularly, engage your larger community, as well as the search committee or the screening committee as the process continues. And so how often really depends upon milestones generally when you're making a choice or upcoming, foreshadowing things that are coming up in the next week or 2 is typically a good time to engage. Colleges set up websites to ensure they're communicating not only with their internal community but with candidates, so candidates have an understanding of the process as they engage and as they participate in the process. And so again, it's a balancing act of sharing information, but not too much information at the beginning and as the process continues until it becomes a public process when the finalists or semi-finalists are interviewed and introduced to your community. Questions? Compensation package is typically something you want to have a conversation up front. You may not advertise it or include it in your ads or in your announcement, but you want people to ask. And so you need to be prepared for presidents. Typically, there's a difference between when you go out into the market after a president that's been around for a few years and what he or she is paid versus what the market is now demanding from presidents. And there's resources out there to help you gauge that. And compensation packages include salary, retirement contributions, there's the state benefit package, leave accruals, some other training or membership organizations, and occasionally some additional health care coverage. One of the other things you want to think about is how you're going to engage that larger community. And I've seen surveys done up front as you're trying to put together that profile. What are we looking for in a candidate, what skills and experiences, and what you're looking for in terms of processes. So you might have a survey with your whole community can kind of identify the challenges and opportunities facing the college or the larger community that might help inform the search committee's process and profile development. And then again, the open forums is fairly traditional as you interview those 5 or 6 finalists at the beginning of the process. Remember, candidates are looking at you too, and I've seen kind of certain processes where it seems to forget that, and you're inviting someone into your community, into your college here, and certainly if they've made it through the process to come and visit, you want to treat them in a welcoming way and engage them so that you're serious about them and they're serious about you.
John, isn't it also true that not only the candidates, but the community is essentially evaluating the board of trustees and handling the entire process? And from the community perspective, grading the board of trustees, because this is our single most important task?
I think it's true. I mean, you're a big part of this community. And people are always evaluating the decisions you make. And again, this is the most important decision you make. And this person will represent you to your larger community. If this is the person that day in and day out engages with the internal community, your students, faculty, classified employees, and your external community. Those folks who care about the college or who you want to care about the college, and it's your representative. So this is the biggest decision you make. And people will evaluate you and how you engage them in the process and the decisions you make, particularly that final decision you've made to hire.
So when you talk about making that final decision, in 2012, we had a heart-to-heart conversation here among the board members about a unanimous decision. And speaking yesterday with President Lees, he reminded me that he was acutely aware that a unanimous decision is important for the incoming president, and shared that it was his intentions to not accept an offer from a college where the board of trustees was not unanimous in that final vote.
I think, you're on a typewriter. You're that president, so you do want the support of your bosses. And there have been presidents hired with split decisions, and they've been successful as well. But getting that endorsement from your bosses, the board, is important. So there is an effort typically to have that unanimous decision, to indicate that support, that endorsement right from the get-go. And then even if you have concerns as individual board members, you kind of build into that plan of onboarding to address those concerns. And sometimes the person doesn't know your community well. And so what do you do as you, that first few weeks, that first few months, or first year of that president to help ensure that president reaches out to the community, gets to know the person is outside of education or higher education? What kind of steps can you take to acquaint them? Of course, from the system perspective, we're concerned with that balance. And somebody asked this question earlier, are you hiring internal to the state or external to the state, people who know how Washington's unique centralized, decentralized decision-making works. And sometimes some presidents have a little rough ride as they try to figure that out. So all those things can be mitigated if you think about it up front. And we talk a little bit about that onboarding plan. And as you build that, once you get near the end of the process and you're looking at those finalists, what kind of steps can you take to support the continued development and awareness of your community, both internal and external? And you monitor that plan and track it to ensure it's being followed and evolves as the president gets here. And so on. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the search cycle. We're fairly familiar with it. I touched on it. You touched on it. But you want to, usually it aligns with the academic year. You start late in the year, your candidates that are on the market may be snapped up before you get to the decision point. You want folks around, so you don't want to make the decision during summer quarter when particularly your faculty and your students aren't here. You want folks to be aware that you have an opening. And if you're out there advertising off cycle, sometimes you folks are right in the cycle, right? You're right timely in terms of providing that notice, giving you this academic year to run that search process and time. So I've divided the search process up into these different stages. Finding process is kind of where you're at now. Recruiting, the outreach process, evaluating those candidates, selection, and transition. Again, I think we talked about the time it takes for the trustees who are sitting on the committee, but it takes time for those members who are not sitting on the committee, because you'll have special meetings. You interview those candidates, just a day or two or three that you devote to that process. So keeping that in mind, when that might occur in terms of your professional and personal lives as well. And typically, that process would be in April, May. The whole thing is designed to ensure you have a decision before people disappear into their summer breaks. And that way they can participate in that process. And I've broken down those stages into some additional information. Again, right now you're kind of in that planning stage, thinking about whether or not you need a consultant, and laying out who should be on the search committee. You've already done some of those things, it sounds like. Formalizing that, usually that runs October through January. You're developing your position profile, you're assessing your climate, figuring out what you need in a candidate, what kinds of skills and experience might be important to take you to the next phase in your college and community's life. Meet whatever challenges and opportunities are in place now and in the future. Typically, you if you engage a consultant, you've got 6 to 8 weeks process there in terms of going through an RFP process. So that's a decision you need to make soon. And then at the same time, you're developing that search committee, meeting with them, having that conversation on the vision, mission, values, challenges and opportunities, interests, and that starts forming that position profile. The profile usually includes a description of your larger community, your college community, challenges and opportunities, what you're looking for. Typically, it launches the advertisement. Usually, sometimes it's in December, sometimes in January. It's national, and that depends on what you're looking for, what you're looking for in a candidate. Sometimes it's not. But you need to be aware of those deadlines. There's usually 3 or 4 week deadline before some of the national publications, and getting that material to them in time. There's costs associated with that, and then getting those materials out the door and look through whatever mailing lists or whatever email lists you decide.
John, I don't know if it's not time to ask it, but what is the landscape out there in hiring new presidents? Are there a lot of candidates available? What's been typical for colleges in the system?
Most recently, colleges have felt like they've had good choices to make. It kind of comes and goes. Washington salaries are a little lower than the national for president salaries. And so that has impact. So getting folks with president experience is usually not the case. Usually it's somebody coming up from a VP or a provost level, taking our positions. Lately it's been out of state. Again, somebody's first presidency, rather than someone who was moving from a smaller state or a smaller college to your college to your community. So it's hard to say what's typical, but I think lately colleges have felt that they've had choices. I think 2 years ago maybe that wasn't the case. I think it's important once you engage in this thing, you don't want to have a failed search, right? That's what I swore never to do. When I got through 4 or 5 of them, luckily, and my luck is going to run out. Because a failed search really just sets you back. And so being thoughtful right up front and understanding the environment, both internal to the external community and to the state, is important. And understanding what you're looking for as president, what would be acceptable skills and experience. You want to keep your mind open until you start making a decision point. So my philosophy in this is be rather broad with the qualifications, and then you can make choices as those choices are presented. You want to shut your choices out before you get a chance to make a conscious decision. So you might have the image of an ideal candidate, but wait until those candidates present themselves, and you can make some informed choices on that. I think one of the other things I've strived for, striven for, it's not an English major, but it is to have choices, real choices, so people with different backgrounds. So have the top candidates that represent different choices for you to make. That way, again, you get that evaluation and compare and contrast what you have in candidates versus what you need and what you'd like to have in a successful candidate. John, can I answer your question?
You talked about not wanting to have the failed search, but can you also address the difference between a failed search and a bad hire.
Yeah. Well, that hire is worse.
So there are times where the failed search is because you didn't find the right candidate, and the best course of action is to make the decision to start again.
That's right, and that's a good point. I think the turmoil that you get with a bad decision, feeling that you're forced to make a bad decision to avoid a failed search is the wrong move, because that just creates the turmoil both internal and external in the community, and really major detraction from your mission, from services. It becomes the focal point rather than the student. And it's very divisive. People take sides, of course. So you want to make the right decision. And the right decision, if you don't have candidates that meet your needs, then the best decision might be to have an interim, ask the current incumbent if he or she can stay until you get to be able to make that right choice.
Thank you.
And thank you for that question. That's a good clarification. Web page, again, the important tool, both in communicating with your candidates and your community. In evaluation, you're collecting application materials. Typically, positions are open until filled, so you continue to engage those candidate pools and continue to receive applications, maybe up to the point where you're interviewing, or the final interviews have happened in the past. The committee typically is involved in that process. Sometimes the consultant, if you have one, narrows the group down from those who aren't qualified at all. Lots of people throw their hat in the ring, and you look to your profile and say, this person doesn't fit our needs at all, or this is just somebody who's thrown their hat in the ring and from not any relatable experience. Screen that down to a manageable number. And there's no magic in the numbers. Sometimes screening down from 80 or 50 down to 20 or 25, and then this search committee or this screening committee takes over and narrow it down to 10 or so you might interview in the first interview, and narrows it down to 5 after that. So again, no magic in the numbers, and the process that works for you, in terms of how you narrow that down. Trustees are kept in the loop, both through the representatives and through report out at the board meetings. And then we get it off to that forum process.
So within your search stages, so what is the time frame or turnaround associated with an RFP should we choose to go with a consultant? Just based on Big Ben's internal process.
6 to 8 weeks, I think. Get something out, advertise. You've got to get the advertising out. You can reach out to known folks, and typically you could engage. We did a number of recent searches, so colleagues have a listing of consultants who applied. Both those who applied and who were successful, and so you get that list. You can get an RFP that's already kind of crafted, and you give your starting place to then craft that to your needs, and then get it out the door pretty quickly. But you've got to leave it out there for a reasonable amount of time for folks to apply, and then I want to say 6 weeks is minimal. But
You're lucky.
yeah.
So in theory, we would be adding 2 months onto this process.
I think you could actually say that you'd be adding 12 weeks, because after you've received responses to proposals, this panel has to score those and then select, and then a contract with a consultant has to be negotiated and agreed to before you take another step forward.
You can run some steps concurrently, but you don't get too far, because the consultant will come in with his or her process, and you don't want to be too far ahead of that process. If you're going to engage a consultant, if you're hiring an expert, you want to use that. That's why you're hiring an expert, to use their expertise.
John, my experience in county government is that anytime we do an RFP or an RFQ, we bring the shortlisted candidates in for face-to-face interviews and scoring before our body makes an actual decision. That would be similar, I would assume, for
It is
Board of
similar.
Trustees.
It can be similar. I mean, again, I've seen it where the trustees have delegated that initial screening down to an internal group, usually HR, business office, and then would interview a couple of candidates maybe after done it that way. And you have a process here. It is challengeable, so you do want to make sure you follow the process. So you don't want that setback and have a challenge to start again. But yeah, it could be fairly similar to what you're saying.
Thank you.
I think one of the things you want to think about as you go through this process and you collect information from your community and outside of the search committee is how you're going to do that. What kind of, and again, I'm a little behind the curve in technology, but back in the day we set up a phone line for people to do phone messages. Now there's web pages and other kinds of things that people can submit their comments about what they're looking for in a candidate or what they saw in the candidates as you bring them in to the open forums. You can provide you that feedback for your consideration. Selection, going through that process of narrowing it down, selected the finalist, contract negotiations begin. Again, you have to make that decision in a public meeting. Typically, a board will delegate the negotiations to the chair to finalize. Once you've made a decision that a candidate or a couple of candidates are your finalists, and then you can engage in that negotiation contract, and the contract will need to come back to the board for final approval and adoption in a public meeting. The transition is an important part, not to forget about, and I touched on a little bit earlier on the onboarding. Typically that starts in May and June as you start looking at your finalist group, who's going to be here, then you start crafting an onboarding process to meet that candidate's experiences, opportunities for growth, to get to know you a little bit better. I think it's an important part that is often forgotten. That candidate will come in with wanting your support, needing the support of the larger community. Typically comes from outside of the community, so how you engage and how you introduce the community and introduce the community to the candidate is something that I think deserves time and an investment in figuring out. And again, the adapting process can continue throughout that first year or longer, depending on the person you hire. I'm not going to get into a lot of these steps. This just gets you another level of detail, so I'm kind of drilling down to this thing. Kind of aligning it with an academic year and indicating who's typically involved in either the process or the decisions. Again, if you look through this and you have any specific questions, I hope that what you see here on the screen has been consistent with what I've been talking about. And but there's always the possibility, I just make stuff up and I've gotten too far afield. So anyway, again, it starts at the beginning with the decisions whether consultants needed or not, what kind of assignment is going to be made to that consultant, whether it's the full search process or parts of it, getting through that process in a couple of months, at the same time engaging the steering, or excuse me, I keep saying steering, I had a steering committee meeting yesterday, it's the search committee. And then get going through the process where you start engaging the general public, both internal and external community in which you're looking for a candidate, and then getting that profile done and out the door and advertising, screening candidates. I think one of the first things the search committee will do is that profile, have discussion on compensation, and then set out a timeline. Having that schedule, getting that on their calendars, when we're going to meet and make these choices as we proceed through the process. So getting that timeline ironed out so that they can be finished well before the end of the academic year. I mentioned earlier that visitation is part of what you've done in the past, and it's typically a part of this process. Factoring that in. Reference checks when that occurs and who does that is important. I have seen it done both ways with the board members doing the reference checks. I think that's an important part to hear that firsthand, not watch through the lens, but I've also, I have a 9-member board, so I typically have done this. And then make sure that I'm very clear on running the information. So again, not a right or wrong, let's work what works for you. Make sure you're making that right choice. Again, a reference to the meetings or public meeting act, and assistance of your assistant attorney general, and again, going through this process. Any questions, thoughts, any other thing I think I missed?
Trustees?
Yeah, that was helpful.
Thank you, John. It was very thorough, and I greatly appreciate you making the time to travel over to give us this presentation.
Always good. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Does anyone need a break before we continue? Okay. So with regard to the overall process, I want to thank both Melinda and Kim. We have had numerous visits, meetings, and a tremendous amount of exchanges and reviews to get to a draft potential presidential search process. And I recognize that that process that's in the draft is presented without an outside consulting firm, which is a decision that all of you will have to make. The other item that I want to discuss too with you about this draft schedule is that we were more aggressive with the intent to be out and commencing the search by mid-November. A couple of things on our goals in our draft was to actually have made a decision and extended an offer by March 31st. And there was a piece of intention there, and that is a bit of a buffer in case some portion of the process steps off the rails or there's a delay for some particular reason that's unforeseen. Then we have the month of April to work through. But when we found President Lee's, we did it in 4 months because President Benatti at the time notified us in February of his intent to retire. And so we commenced the process and we pushed a very aggressive schedule. So from a 4-month schedule, we're trying to present to you a proposal that would run over a 7-month process. Also taking into consideration things like the Thanksgiving, Christmas, and New Year's holidays for both the search committee, but the entire campus community. None of what is in this draft is etched in stone, but it's open for discussion. A couple of things around this discussion today. One is, if you feel like you have enough information to decide internal or external search utilizing a consultant, but also I do want to have Kim speak to, well, Linda and Kim speak to the cost of the 2012 search process, where we are fiscally in terms of the ability to shoulder a cost of a full search led by a consultant, and also to talk about the 2019 President's Salary Survey. We are going to have a decision to make about salary range. That is a formal action that comes before the board. In our conversation, Kim and I were talking about not just the actual salary range, but where are we with the rest of the package for the president. And there's some room for discussion there. And finally, Big Ben does not have a formal job description for its president. And we looked at this in 2012 and we went with what currently is represented in board policy, what feedback that we got from both the campus and the general community surveys that we conducted, and those things that the Board of Trustees felt at that time were high points of what we were looking for and the right candidate. I think Kim and I both have the opinion that we would like to get to a president's job description before this process commences. And so if you follow all the way down to item 8, and I recognize there may be some scheduling challenges. In the previous search process, we added study sessions and special meetings for the board multiple times. We moved to study sessions whenever possible that occurred prior to the actual Board of Trustees meeting, rather than consuming their schedule on a separate day. But in this draft, we're proposing a study session in October prior to the board meeting on the 10th to discuss the president's job description, discuss the salary range and benefit package, and also review proposed questions for both the campus and a community survey, and give you an opportunity to present some questions that you would like to be included in those surveys. So that's a lot. So let's go back, if we could, at least to the list, because I believe this 1 through 8 we have to work our way through today to help set the stage for what we do in the coming months. So right back to internal versus external search. Do you have a feel? Do you have specific things you'd like to know that would be brought back in October? And would you like to talk about costs first and foremost? Is that a yes?
Yeah, I'd like to know more about just cost implications, one way versus another.
And before that, maybe, I know, Linda, have you been through a presidential search twice? So I guess I would like to ask the executive committee here, if you will, do you have any other thoughts that John didn't really present that we need to be aware of? I know it's pretty comprehensive. Huh? Sorry.
I said I could tell you which way I would go.
Well, even beyond internal or external, is there anything else that we need to consider as we move forward?
I think the timing is really important, just as John said, to keep it on track and what your on-campus folks can do for you versus what a consultant can do for you.
Cost is a part of it. I don't know that cost should be the sole driver of your decision. I think, as Linda said, timing is important and organization is important. So the best searches are the ones where everyone has a clear understanding of what we're looking for, particularly among the screening committee members, but also across campus. So if everybody's looking for something different, that's going to be challenging in that, which is why a description is helpful. You're going to have to do one anyway for the announcement. So that's really critical. Making sure that people have a commitment to the process, because when you're on that committee, and it doesn't matter what position you hold, whether you're a trustee or someone else, that becomes your first priority, is to get to those meetings. Otherwise, we're going to be into 2020 well, that's right around the corner, 2021. But I think the other thing that I would ask you to consider is, so based on what you know about the climate on the campus already, and I say this not because I have a preference. I will say I believe strongly in the ability of the folks who work in the Human Resources Department, not me, the staff, the folks in that department, to be able to conduct an exceptional search. They're really good people. But I think you have to ask yourselves, based on what you know about how people feel within the campus community, do you think that they would be more comfortable with an outside person, or do you think that there is trust in the Human Resources Department and the executive leadership team to be able to lead that process or to help guide that process? I think that's really critical for you guys to ponder, because whatever way you go, someone's going to draw a conclusion from that and an opinion. And that is going to either enhance or hamper that process.
So I think with you two taking a pretty substantial load, if we do the internal process, what is your opinion on whether that doing the internal process is a good idea, especially given the campus survey and your level of resources for that?
So it, it is a substantial load, but I think, as Stephen said, so at the point that Terry announced his retirement, the human resources folks, we started processing through that. So we've come to terms as far as, okay, here's what we need to do, here's our support resources, here's how we're going to manage that workload. I will tell you, having done a CEO search with a consultant group, the workload for human resources doesn't change. There's just a third party in the relationship. And so we're going to be busy no matter what process you choose, and we will support whatever process you choose.
But again, what is your level of comfort? I mean, given the campus climate survey, would you feel more comfortable, or would it be your recommendation to use a consultant?
So I would say that that's kind of a hard question, but okay. So recognizing that we all have blind spots about our abilities and how we interact with others, I think that people are confident in the work that the Human Resources Department does. I don't know that they always agree with the decisions that we make or that I would make, but I think that they're confident and that they have a level of trust in us moving forward. And I would say that, we came through negotiation process. We have good individual and we have good individual relationships with people as well as categories or groups of employees. I would, that's just my opinion, and I could have a blind spot, and there may be other opinions out there that you might want to listen to, but that's my perception.
Linda, any comment?
I totally agree with that. The workload does not change. Does not change, and frankly, you're just paying somebody a bucket of money to put their free hat on, dance around. Sorry. No, not yet.
I can get a hat, but no.
Having been through it twice, I just saw where we were doing all the work and somebody else was the front.
It's a lot.
I would say there are pros and cons to internal versus external, as John here intimated. And from the faculty perspective, I would say the big con against an outside consultant would be that the faculty have expressed great concern to me recently about financial expenditures and financial transparency. But I would also say that in terms of an internal search, I will tell you right now, the minute Dr. Lee's retired, my phone blew up with text messages from colleagues that were like, I want to be on this committee, make sure I'm the one who's appointed. And it's nice to feel important, but even I will be putting a lot of time and thought into picking the right person for this committee. And I know the faculty's chief concern, as the report and the surveys have also indicated, is transparency and minimizing bias in decisions that are made. And so I would say that when Dr. Lee's successor is hired, whoever it is, the main thing that I anticipate that I will hear from faculty is they want to make sure that this was what the committee actually wanted. They want to make sure that the process was as unbiased as possible and a cross-section of the input from every member of the committee, especially the faculty. And so I would say that from the faculty perspective, I personally think, and again, I'm speaking as myself, I haven't put a vote on this or anything, but I personally think the financial concerns of hiring a consultant and the logistical concerns thereof are dwarfed by making sure that whatever you do is as unbiased as possible and, while respecting confidentiality, as transparent as possible.
Yeah, so I would say, especially for your group and all the constituents, is to look at this process and review it. And if there is any opportunity to add more transparency, we absolutely welcome that input on this. That being said, I feel that the last presidential search was very successful. We do have very tight financial concerns, and I agree with both of your opinions that you're basically doing the same level of work, you're just paying somebody else. I think there's problems with the consultant process of maybe not getting all the candidates that you might get from a more open process, especially with technology these days. It's pretty easy to make those connections. So that being said, I would move to go the internal search process.
Before we go there, can we hear from Dr. Humphries a little? We didn't get to.
You can. We do have a motion on the floor, so could you second that, and then we can just move to discussion. Is that your second, or is there a second? Okay. So the motion dies for lack of a second. Dr. Humphrey?
I would concur with everything that has been said. I would concur with everything that has been said. From a financial perspective, I don't know the benefit that one gets from outside consulting. Anecdotally, and hearing from other schools around the state, but certainly I don't have the perspective, the broad perspective that John has, but I've heard instances where schools are really frustrated with the experience of the outside consulting.
So I wanted to ask both of you, Salah and Bryce, about the Dr. Clark report and our upcoming work with regard to accreditation. Do you believe that an outside consultant can come up to speed fast enough to successfully take both of those things into consideration and properly represent the campus community when looking for their recommended candidates for president?
Can you give a little bit more detail behind your question?
Well, so one of the conversations that Kim and I have had is that it would be my recommendation that we talk about the upcoming accreditation process, the Clark report's findings, and the steps that have been taken, that we're upfront and out front with that information so that all the candidates hear it from us, rather than them doing their Google research and finding those things on their own. Do you think a third-party consultant has the ability to understand the climate of this campus based on those two things that we are currently working with to find us the candidate best equipped to lead us through the next chapter of those two processes?
I would say, well, Christine Clark was a third party, so that is part of it. But I think that the Clark report addressed a lot more symptoms that, or I should say, it listed more symptoms than it listed underlying causes. And I do think that one of the underlying causes was a lot of frustration over communication and transparency. So I don't know if a consultant could get up to speed enough, but I would say that something I see a lot in the faculty is a concern that decisions aren't a cross-section of what the people actually want. And so I would say that, to me, it wouldn't really be about whether a consultant could get up to speed or not, but whether their decisions are going to be neutral enough for what the faculty and staff would want.
I would say that these consultants, if they've been around very long, they're going to see a lot of different things about a lot of different colleges. So accreditation is nothing, every institution hired has to deal with accreditation. And And the types of issues that we were dealing with assessment and planning, frankly, are not, they occur in other schools as well. So that I don't think is something that they would be unfamiliar with. Some of the other concerns underlying the report, again, every institution has their issues, right? And so if the consultant has worked with different schools for any length of time, it may not be the exact thing that Big Bend is facing, but they would have seen a variety of things.
I do see opportunity for this school to continue to grow and improve based on all that we've been through with regard to accreditation and based on all that we are going through as a result of self-examination and the Clark report.
To me, the bigger question is, will they be able to bring a better pool of candidates to the college than if the college was not working with the consultant? And I don't know. I think Anna makes a good point that with digital media and whatnot, you can get exposure across the country pretty quickly.
Doesn't take very long. So thank you both for that. You do have the 2012 presidential search expenses in your document. We did spend $29,880.82 in the process in 2012 without a consultant. The salary survey is also in your packet. If you look at the 2019 system salary survey, the median is $213,343. The average is $218,777, and President's Lee's was at $205,854. So we have some work to do there. And also, Kim, would you at this point like to talk a little bit about what we discussed with regard to the other elements of the compensation package?
Sure. So the first thing I would say, as far as regarding the presidential search expenses, you're going to pay more than the $29,000 just because everything's more expensive. So, and Linda and I have talked about that. So she's already got money that she's setting aside to cover that, whatever path you choose. So the salary that's listed in the survey, those surveys are done typically in the spring, and so I want to say that data was from March. So Terry did get a 3% increase on July 1, so that 205 is going to be a little higher. And but you'll need to decide what your range is. I think John in his presentation spoke to that typically when you go out, you're going out with a salary higher than what your incumbent person was making. So that's something to keep in mind. And we have I'm going to use the term, so we have a dated board policy that really speaks to the leave that is available or provided to the president. And I honestly don't know the last, so that hasn't been updated since I've been here. So it's going to be at least probably 15 years old. But one of the things that we've noticed with Dr. Bonatti and with Dr. Lee, so this policy allows for the regular vacation accrual that employees get, but it also provides additional leave. And Melinda shared with us that when the college, when there was the economic issues in the state and salaries were frozen, the trustees chose to provide some additional leave in the form of personal leave to him to kind of offset that piece. But what we've discovered with as we look back is that is wonderful that we are providing that, but neither of those presidents are using it. And so I would encourage you to look at what other colleges are doing to have a conversation with Jason about what we can do. So if there are additional benefit things that John alluded to, whether that's in retirement or health insurance, what is it going to take to create a package that's attractive for somebody, and what can we sustain? My personal opinion is that additional leave is not an attractive package. So there are other things out there, and I'm not sure that you want to hire somebody who is off using all their leave, but that, you could. So that would be a consideration. But just something that would be something that you need to be thinking about, and that you want to have not necessarily finalized, but you need to have an awareness so that as the announcement goes out, those are the types of questions that people will ask before they submit their materials. They'll want to know some of those pieces.
So with regard to that, the discussion that we had most recently is that particular board policy should be reviewed by staff, and at your October board meeting, a draft with recommended changes brought forward for first reading and ultimately adoption at the November meeting prior to commencing the actual announcement of the position opening, so that our ducks are all in a row. So that's, at the moment, that's where we stand. So I wanted to make sure that you were aware of all of those things, because we're trying to be as well planned, but also as tidy as we need to be. And there is some need around job description and benefit package to tidy up a bit. I guess that brings me back to, do you feel like you know whether you want to do an internal or external search at this point?
So based on what I've heard, I'd entertain motion. I would make a motion for us to utilize the internal search process.
And I have a second.
We have a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion?
I think for me coming in, I wasn't as much of a fan of that idea, just based on concerns associated with diluting staff from some of the other things that we tasked them with in terms of priorities. Based on what staff has mentioned, it sounds like you guys are aware of those priorities, and you'll make those things continue to be a priority and resource load folks, so that it's not working nights and weekends all day, every day. But I think just in honor of the timing and the schedule that's been laid out, I think is really well thought through. I'm also not concerned with the bias aspect, just based on the process we're talking about at this point and the amount of voices that are going to be able to contribute. So that allays that concern as well.
To add to that, because I agree with Thomas, I came in with that same thought process, but I've been listening to staff, and then when Anna pointed out the additional resource, like the technology. So my fear, as Dr. Humphrey says, would we be able to tap into all the resources out there, all the individuals, and with technology the way that it is, and the options that we have, I think that will do a really good job of that search of getting the most available candidates we can. I do see personally have a little bit of housekeeping needs to prepare for that. So, but originally I came in with that, no, more external would be better for time. And then when that discussion came about too, so thank you all for contributing and for giving your points of view.
I think we had 36 candidates in the pool.
2/3 of a box. That's the box in my office.
There was a really strong response to the initial call in 2012. Is there any other discussion, Bill?
Yeah, just seeing the detail of stuff that you've gone through already, and having gone through it before, I think we're better prepared to do it ourselves this go around. I certainly agree that hiring an outside consultant, you're paying them to promote their own stable of candidates, if you will, and I think we have a pretty good idea, especially when we are focused on the transparency, which I think will happen as much as possible, given the constraints of a search. But I'm very much in favor of us doing an internal search.
Okay. Yeah. Anything you want to add? Hearing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. Thank you. So we've talked about search expenses. We've talked about the president's salary survey. In that, what I would assume, Kim, is that we could prepare for October to have a proposal to consider and some side-by-side comparisons with regards to the rest of the compensation package, so the trustees can see what is currently being offered in some of the other colleges to presidents in the state.
Yeah, that's currently a topic on the HRMC listserv this week.
I mean, you're perfect in this
Yes.
case. So that in October, you will start the work with regard to addressing job description and board policy with regard to the compensation package, so that we can move those things along. The other item before we talk specifically to this timeline that I wanted to also have you talk about is the Presidential Search Advisory Committee members. And so in your packet, you have the 2012 roster and then the draft 2019-2020 roster. It is accurate that in the internal side of the committee, we go to each of the different departments and groups that are represented, and they will select their representatives. The community side, I'll come to you, and John and I will work on bringing to you some names and encourage you to submit some names if you have someone that you would want to recommend for community, local industry, K-12. What I ask you to not do is to approach someone and ask them to serve prior to us having a chance to actually discuss that and deliberate that. And also, I will ask you to approve this roster either with changes or without changes at the October board meeting. So I'm looking for any comments or suggestions.
Since it is all about the students, I'm wondering if it would be wise to add 2 students rather than 1. And I think they certainly would be available on campus and should be able to participate. Just a thought.
Any other thoughts?
I guess there's always the concern about, how many people are on the actual committee. So maybe, but also a thought is with attendance and students, especially with their schedules, appointing an alternate.
So proposing 2, suggesting 1 plus an alternate.
Help me understand the difference between a community representative and a local industry representative.
I think there's a lot of ways that you can approach that, but one would be someone specifically from the industry sectors that work through our advisory committees for the workforce training that's provided here at the school. So that's a little more distilled down than identifying community leaders in general that you would bring on as a community representative. And then also trying to not have overlap, because the other thing that we need to be considerate of is, making sure there's diverse representation.
Do we have who the community and the local industry representatives were last time?
So that, the other thing I should tell you is that the list of people that actually go on this committee were not identified during the 2012 process to prevent them from being exposed to outside influences during the review process. But you did have the list, right?
Yeah, so I believe the community representative from 2012 was Felix Ramon, a former trustee. The K-12 was Mike Villarreal, and I am blanking on the local industry person.
Chris Vogel, who was the
Potato guy.
second director.
Sorry,
Potato guy.
sorry, potato guy, sorry.
Mr. Potato Head.
My bad.
So we would not take any action on this committee roster at this point. I want you to think about it, but I also want you to think about names and individuals based on their current roles in the community to suggest or offer up at our next meeting when we review this. But we would like to set the construction of the which allows it then to get out into the campus community so departments can start to make their, as Salah said, challenging decision on whom to pick and whom not to pick for the roster. Are we agreed? Okay. So with regard to this draft that you have here, we felt like we couldn't come into this discussion today without putting some time in. And again, I really thank Kim and Melinda for coming to the table. We've had sit downs and conversations and email exchanges to try and get here. I threw together a first draft that originally looked at what we were going to do in September and October just to get the ball rolling. And Kim nudged me to get out of my box a little further. And so I went ahead and examined everything from 1995 and 2012. And considering the conversations so long about transparency, one of the items that you see in here in every single month is a chair's update to the campus community. Acknowledging if we don't have milestones, then the report is we don't have milestones to report. But we do feel like we need to be regularly communicating. And so as the chair of the board of trustees and the chair of the process, providing something in writing to the entire campus community provides an opportunity for Matt then to take that and craft that into an update to the community to make sure the local media is aware of where we are in our process and our ability to ultimately follow our approved timeline. But the other thing that will occur is next Monday, I'm scheduled to attend the breakfast for the faculty, and we'll be speaking directly to the decisions that we made here today. And my goal as board chair to move this process to ultimately the selection of the next right president for Big Bend. Leads me to the October schedule, and that would be currently proposed to conduct the study session on October 10th in the morning prior to the Board of Trustees regular meeting that afternoon. Among things to discuss, the president's job description, the salary range and benefit package, the campus community survey, and we're asking the trustees look at the enclosure that you have in your packet, which were the questions that were asked internally and externally, and consider based on everything you know in your service here, if there are other questions, new questions, or rewrites of these questions you would like us to consider asking. The intent is, based on this process and this timeline, to conduct an internal and an external survey electronically, if I'm correct, right, Kim? Which we did do this in 2012. We would like you to have an opportunity to refine those questions and add things. We certainly would want to hear from the leadership team as well if you had suggestions with regards to questions that we should consider when we meet in October. And then additionally, we'll be looking at a change in the policy for the compensation portion. So we'll be reviewing during the study session potential changes to the overall compensation package. Is that right? That is what we're proposing for the study session. Moving to the Board of Trustees meeting, we would set the salary range, set the job description, approve the formation of the Presidential Search Advisory Committee, approve the proposed timeline, approve the survey questions, and also have a first reading on board policy change. In November, the committee would meet for the first time. That initial meeting would be for the purpose of making sure everyone understands what's expected of them, that the Presidential Search Advisory Committee is exactly that, advisory to the Board of Trustees for the purpose of finding our next president, and that it is the Board of Trustees' responsibility to ultimately select and approve, but also wanting to make sure that everyone in the room is committed to the time that it's going to take us. There is one benefit this time around that we did not have in 2012, and that is NeoGov. So actual candidate packages can be reviewed securely, electronically, prior to coming to the table for the Professional Search Advisory Committee meeting, which should shorten the length of some of that initial wrangling when all of the packages arrive. We have a Board of Trustees meeting scheduled for the 14th of November. We would like you to be able at that time to review the campus community survey results, review and perhaps act on the recommended recruitment materials and outreach methods, and also approve that board policy on our second reading with regard to the compensation package. And then finally, approve the launch of what Kim and I had discussed as a 21-day recruitment process. We did a 24 or a 25-day process because of where we started in the calendar in 2012 and got a substantial pool. And certainly within 21 days, we don't get a substantial pool, we're able to extend it and keep it open for as long as necessary.
Yeah, so we typically post, as John said, it's open until filled, but the priority consideration date is that into that 21 days. So it's always going to be up until the committee decides they're ready to move beyond those applications to the next steps. So we wouldn't pull it in.
In December, prior to the holiday, so in the first couple weeks of December, we would like to conduct the initial candidate review by the committee. In that process, we'd like to get to the round one cut, which would trim the list to the top 10 candidates. And at that time, Kim and I would handle the reference checking, and I did meet one-on-one with Mike Wren to make absolutely sure how we had done that in the past. And I'm completely in agreement that for the purpose of consistency, that our VP of Human Resources leads the questioning, and I'm in the room to hear the responses. But to make sure that we're asking consistent, proper questions, Kim would take care of that inquiry, and then we would compare notes from that. Ultimately, that moves us to January after the holidays are over with a second round selection process for the committee, trimming the list to the top 5. And at that stage, we would bring forward the list of the top 5 candidates to the full Board of Trustees. We would make sure the campus was aware that we were moving to a short list. February, the Board of Trustees would officially select their final candidates, conduct interviews on campus. Candidates would be on campus to meet with stakeholder groups. We did conduct forums in 2012. I'm committed to making sure that those forums are conducted so the campus community has the opportunity to meet, greet, and question the candidate. In March, candidate site visits would be conducted, hopefully after all of the serious snow has melted and travel is hindered by weather. Board of Trustees deliberation and selection of the new president and contract offer to candidate. And my personal ultimate goal is a new president announced to the campus and the community no later than March 31st of 2020. That's where we are today. I'd like you to think this over and consider anything that you feel like we may have missed or we need to add to this process, and we'll bring an updated timeline to you for review and approval of the October Board of Trustees. Any questions at this point? I don't think we have any further business other than to determine if the study session on the 10th of October works in the morning, and then action it if that is possible. So where are you on being available that morning?
What time are we doing it? Let's start there.
Probably 9.
Okay, so go 9 to 12 and then
Lunch.
an hour for lunch and then come back. I'm open.
I'm not available at all that morning, so we can go to 10. that's not the end of the world from my perspective. I think if you can get 4 or 5. I am here that afternoon for the actual board trustee.
Okay. Certainly, any of these places where you would like to have feedback, if you could get that from Melinda. And I do want to also, around the conversation of transparency, ask that you direct anything that you need me to answer or want me to know about or consider, that you please flow it to Melinda so that she is the keeper of the record of those inquiries, comments, and suggestions, and then she'll make sure that I'm in the loop so that we have it all properly in the server. It is going to be a challenging time. I find this to be a great opportunity for us. So it will be a lot of work. It will be a lift. And there were a number of points along the way in 2012 where the trustees were feeling the fatigue of a process that was, in my perspective, and I think John and Amy can concur, seemed very fast-paced because we were accelerated in the 4-month schedule. I'm appreciative of having more time this process, but I also don't want to go right out to the deadline wire. I would like to know that we've walked the new president through this campus prior to the campus not having a president here. So that said, I would need a motion to set the study session for the morning of October 10th.
So moved. Second.
I have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. That would be the last of the business planned for us today. Melinda, is there anything I'm missing? Okay. Hearing none. Thank you, everyone, trustees and members of the campus community. Meeting adjourned.
Now we're in your